It was almost midnight when Tom left work and headed home. His old Ford was barely coping with the evening chill, and Tom decided to stop at the nearest gas station to grab a coffee and rest for a bit. The road was dark, and he hardly encountered any other cars. The gas station was located on the outskirts of the town, with a lone neon sign flickering in the darkness. Inside, a dim light illuminated the space, and a young woman with a name tag that read Sarah stood by the counter. Tom greeted her politely, and she responded with a weak smile that seemed forced. "Are you working here alone?" Tom asked, dropping some change for coffee. "Yes," she answered shortly, glancing over her shoulder. Tom noticed how quiet it was inside. Too quiet. There was no sound of refrigerators or the coffee machine. He decided to break the silence with a joke, "You probably have the quietest job here." Sarah smiled again, but this time her eyes were looking not at him but somewhere outside the window. Quiet. Not always. Tom felt a slight chill, one that had nothing to do with the weather. He looked around and saw that one of the cars parked by the pumps had its doors open. There was no one inside. "Is that your car?" He nodded towards the vehicle. "No, it's been here since the evening," Sarah replied. "But I haven't seen anyone." Tom decided to check if everything was all right and stepped outside. He had only taken a few steps when he heard a muffled sound from the direction of the forest. Turning around, he saw a dark figure pulling someone by the arm. Tom focused and saw it was a man dragging Sarah toward the trees. "Hey!" Tom shouted and rushed towards them. The man turned around, but his face remained in the shadows. He quickly shoved Sarah to the ground and disappeared into the darkness. Tom ran to the girl and helped her up. "Are you all right?" "Who was that?" he asked. Sarah, trembling, replied, "I don't know. I've never seen him before." Tom glanced toward the forest, but it was quiet. Only the wind was swaying the tops of the trees. "We need to get out of here," he said, helping Sarah to her feet. "Do you have a phone?" "No, I left it inside," she answered. "Then let's go to my car. I'll take you somewhere safe." Tom and Sarah hurried to the gas station to grab her phone. Inside, everything looked just as he had left it, empty and quiet. Sarah quickly grabbed the phone from the counter, and they ran back to his Ford. "Get in and lock the doors," Tom said, closing the driver's door behind him. They started the car and drove off the parking lot. The dark road stretched through the dense forest. Tom glanced at the rearview mirror, trying to make sure they were alone. "It'll be fine," he said, though he wasn't sure himself. "I'll take you to the nearest police station." "Thank you," Sarah whispered, squeezing the phone in her hands. However, a few minutes later, Sarah noticed headlights appearing in the distance behind them. "Someone's following us," she said, her voice trembling. Tom glanced in the mirror. A car with its front headlights off but with its parking lights on was following them at a small distance. "Damn," Tom muttered. "It's him. What are we going to do?" Sarah asked, glancing over her shoulder. "We'll check if he's really following us." Tom suddenly turned onto a side road, but the car behind them also changed direction. It kept its distance, as if deliberately not getting closer. "All right, he's definitely following us," Tom said, pressing harder on the gas pedal. "Hold on." The road became winding, and the forest grew denser. Tom hoped they could lose him, but the stranger didn't fall behind. Sarah held her phone and suddenly noticed the signal came back. "We've got signal." "I'm calling the police," she said quickly, dialing the number. "Tell them where we are," Tom said sharply, trying to avoid a collision. Sarah spoke quickly and in fragments, trying to describe the road and their situation. The police asked them to stay on the line and keep heading toward the nearest station. "They're on their way," Sarah said, catching her breath. "Good, stay on the line," Tom replied, but his gaze was fixed on the rearview mirror. The stranger's car had come closer again, now its headlights blinding their eyes. He slammed the gas pedal, trying to increase the distance, but the road ahead was slippery from a frozen puddle. Tom barely managed to keep control of the car as they slid through a dangerous turn. "Is he still behind us?" Tom asked. "Yes, but the police said a patrol is nearby," Sarah replied, clutching the phone. A few minutes later, flashing police lights appeared in the distance. The stranger's car suddenly stopped and turned around, disappearing into the darkness of the forest. Tom and Sarah stopped by the patrol. They were greeted by two officers, and Sarah began explaining what had happened. "Did you get the car's license plate?" one of the officers asked. "No, it was too dark," Tom replied. "We'll search the area, but it's better if you come with us to the station for your safety," the other officer said. Sarah nodded, still trembling. They didn't know who the man was or why he had been following them, but both of them felt an immense sense of relief as they left the dangerous road behind. The police escort accompanied Tom's car to the nearest station. On the way, Sarah tried to calm herself, but her hands were still trembling. Tom remained silent, focusing on the road, but his mind was spinning with 1,000 questions. At the station, they were greeted by a senior officer. They told the whole story, about the stranger at the gas station, the chase, and the attempt to push them off the road. The officers listened carefully and even reviewed the footage from the gas station's surveillance cameras. "Unfortunately, there were electrical issues in that area," the officer said. "The cameras were only partially operational, but we'll still try to retrieve the footage." After several hours of questioning and filing reports, Tom and Sarah finally left the station. Sarah decided not to work at the gas station anymore, especially during night shifts. "Maybe this is a sign that it's time to make a change," she said as Tom drove her home. "Maybe. But the most important thing is that you're safe," he replied. Sarah got out of the car, and Tom stayed behind the wheel, staring at the dark street. He thought about how it all could have ended if it hadn't been for the police. As Tom turned around to head home, he noticed in the rearview mirror the silhouette of a man standing at the intersection. The silhouette didn't move, but Tom was sure it was the same stranger. This time, he didn't stop or call the police. He pressed the gas pedal and sped off, hoping he would never see him again. It was an ordinary night at the gas station. Jason, a young employee, was finishing up his shift. The street was empty, with cars occasionally passing by. The gas station was located on the outskirts of the city, and it was always peaceful here. However, this night, things were about to change. A car drove through the dark sky, an old black sedan. The men behind the wheel stopped at the pump. Jason noticed his unusual behavior. After fueling, the driver didn't hurry to leave but sat in the car as if waiting for something. A few minutes passed, and Jason decided to approach and ask if everything was okay. He got closer to the car, but the men remained inside, not even looking his way. Jason tried to greet him a few times, but the men didn't respond. Maybe he's just waiting for someone, Jason thought. However, as time went on, it felt strange. Why wasn't this man driving away? Jason decided to approach closer and see if anything unusual had happened. As he cautiously approached the car, he noticed the door wasn't fully closed. He got even closer, peered through the window, and saw a horrifying sight. There were bloody tools in the car, a hammer, scissors, and several other items that shouldn't have been in a regular car. Shocked, Jason stepped back, his heart racing. He felt that something was off in this situation. He looked around and noticed fresh footprints leading into the forest. Something inside him told him these tracks could lead to something sinister. He immediately decided not to call the police, as he had no way to confirm if this was really something serious. He decided to follow the tracks, hoping to find evidence or at least figure out what was going on. The footprints led deeper into the forest, and with every step, Jason felt his nerves tightening. He carefully followed, trying not to make any noise, when suddenly he heard strange noises from behind some bushes. He froze, trying to understand what was happening. Then, in the darkness, a figure appeared. The man, who looked like the same driver, was standing by a tree, facing him. His face was in shadow, but he was holding something shiny in his hands. Jason stood still, trying to figure out what to do next. One thought kept racing through his mind: this could be dangerous. He took a step back, but the man noticed his movement. Feeling the danger instinctively, Jason decided to return to the gas station to avoid putting himself at further risk. However, deep down, he was convinced that this wouldn't be the last encounter with this stranger, and that the forest hid more secrets than it seemed at first glance. Jason quickly turned around, running through the dark forest that seemed to grow denser with every step. His heart was pounding in his chest, and his breathing was heavy from the tension. As soon as he burst into the lit area of the gas station, he immediately pulled out his phone and dialed the police. "This is urgent." Jason's voice trembled with fear. "I work at a gas station. A man came to fuel his car, then stayed in it. I found tools in the car, and the tracks lead into the forest. I think he's doing something really bad." The police responded right away, and Jason provided all the details about what he'd seen. Within minutes, a patrol car arrived, and 2 officers stepped out, ready to take action. "You did the right thing by calling," one of the officers said after listening to Jason's story. "We'll check the forest now." The officers entered the woods with flashlights, and Jason stood at the gas station, watching them from a distance. His mind still couldn't fully process what had happened, but he knew one thing: he had just witnessed something horrifying. Half an hour later, the officers returned, their expression serious. One of the policemen approached Jason and quietly said, "You were right. It was horrific. We found several hidden bodies in the forest." Jason felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. "Bodies," he whispered, unable to believe his ears. "Yes. And that's not all," the officer said, frowning. "It seems this man wasn't just targeting someone. He had a whole network of prepared locations in the forest where he committed awful crimes. And each of his victims disappeared as soon as he did his work." The police continued their investigation, and soon they found even more evidence. It turned out this man was a true psychopath, using gas stations and remote locations to carry out his crimes. Jason stood there, stunned, unable to believe that all of this had happened just a few meters from him. He was simply working at the gas station and never suspected who he was dealing with. His fear gradually turned to relief as the police promised the criminal would be arrested. When everything calmed down and the police finished their work, Jason remained standing there, at the empty gas station. This incident had changed him. He would never forget what he had seen, and he couldn't simply return to his normal life. But he was glad he made the right decision and stopped this danger before it led to even more tragedy. It was an ordinary night at the old gas station, quiet and deserted. Only a few cars passed by from time to time, and the sounds from the fuel pumps broke the silence of the night. Steve, the night worker, was already accustomed to this calm atmosphere. He stood behind the counter, sipping his cup of coffee when he heard a car pull into the gas station. It was a regular sedan that parked in one of the spots. The driver got out of the car, fueled up, and, without hurrying, returned to the cabin. Steve didn't pay much attention to him, as ordinary drivers often stop here at night just to refuel. But soon, another vehicle pulled into the gas station, a large van. It stopped next to the previous car. Steve watched the events from the window, not quite understanding what was happening. The van driver got out, walked to the trunk, opened it, and then began moving something. At first, Steve thought it was just a heavy item or some big bag. But when the men carefully pulled something from the trunk and placed it in the sedan's cabin, Steve saw that it didn't resemble ordinary items. What he saw had the shape of a human body. His heart stopped. Steve tried to make sense of it, but the shape of that object was too suspicious. He watched as the van driver quickly closed the trunk and returned to his vehicle, leaving the sedan standing in place. Steve could feel his nerves starting to play tricks on him. Something was not right. He tried to act as if everything was normal, but the inner alarm signal wouldn't leave him in peace. Steve thought about it for a few minutes and decided to approach the cars to check if everything was okay. He calmly stepped out of the booth and walked over to the sedan, where the body had been transferred earlier. As he got closer, he noticed a red stain visible from one of the windows, which increasingly looked like blood. Steve's heart began to race, and he realized he could no longer just stand there and watch. It was an ordinary night at the old gas station, quiet and deserted. Only a few cars passed by from time to time, and the sounds from the fuel pumps broke the silence of the night. Steve, the night worker, was already accustomed to this calm atmosphere. He stood behind the counter, sipping his cup of coffee when he heard a car pull into the gas station. It was a regular sedan that parked in one of the spots. The driver got out of the car, fueled up, and, without hurrying, returned to the cabin. Steve didn't pay much attention to him, as ordinary drivers often stop here at night just to refuel. But soon, another vehicle pulled into the gas station, a large van. It stopped next to the previous car. Steve watched the events from the window, not quite understanding what was happening. The van driver got out, walked to the trunk, opened it, and then began moving something. At first, Steve thought it was just a heavy item or some big bag. But when the men carefully pulled something from the trunk and placed it in the sedan's cabin, Steve saw that it didn't resemble ordinary items. What he saw had the shape of a human body. His heart stopped. Steve tried to make sense of it, but the shape of that object was too suspicious. He watched as the van driver quickly closed the trunk and returned to his vehicle, leaving the sedan standing in place. Steve could feel his nerves starting to play tricks on him. Something was not right. He tried to act as if everything was normal, but the inner alarm signal wouldn't leave him in peace. Steve thought about it for a few minutes and decided to approach the cars to check if everything was okay. He calmly stepped out of the booth and walked over to the sedan, where the body had been transferred earlier. As he got closer, he noticed a red stain visible from one of the windows, which increasingly looked like blood. Steve's heart began to race, and he realized he could no longer just stand there and watch.